up with special events, or I don't know, things that are going to be going on in the church, and speakers, and I don't know what else. But if if everything holds the way it is, then the next time I teach after next week will be January the 8th. Actually, that'll be the next time that we'll have a normal or a regular Wednesday night service, will be January 8th. We have holidays, we have special stuff going on, so we just need to keep that in mind as the weeks go by. We're studying anti-Semitism. Down at the bottom of the screen is the working definition that I'm using for this class. Comes from a fellow by the name of Olivia Melnick. You'll hear more about him when we get into the actual study on anti-Semitism. Last week and tonight, we're going to be talking about the land and who owns the land and all that. So let me share with you, see if we can get everything working tonight. This is my favorite thing of all. I just love this little thing, Anyways, last week there was an incident. If you're not aware of it, there was an incident over in Amsterdam. Everyone hear about this? Okay. Israel was playing Amsterdam. I believe they were playing Amsterdam in a soccer match. And after the match was over, from the accounts that I read, there was either texts or tweets or something that went out that said, "Attack the Jews." And that's what happened. Basically, after the match, they spent the rest of the evening burning things, and sounds a lot like our country at times. And they were burning things, they were attacking Jews. Several of them were hospitalized and everything. And I thought, boy, I could put something up every week that's similar to this. Okay, because this is going on. This is an incident in Amsterdam, but this is happening around the world. Okay, this is happening around the world. So just something you need to be aware of. This isn't like some, just a class that we're teaching where, maybe you can apply it, maybe you can't. Okay, this is happening right now. Okay, this is happening right now, and we'll deal more with the way it's been going on in our country here. Probably after, when we get into the part on anti-Semitism. This is the outline for our class. I got a thumbs up, so we're good. We're looking at the first part about the land. Next, we'll be talking about the history of anti-Semitism. And I've broken it into 3 separate parts. Just for your own information, not that it means anything, but on this date in 354 AD, Augustine, or Augustine, depending on which part of the country you're from, okay, was born. Now, he's going to play a very big part in the study on anti-Semitism. And you'll see that when we get to the early church fathers, because they kind of dropped the ball big time. So anyways, this is how we're going to cover it. I'm not sure how far we're going to get when we wrap up next week, but we'll just keep going. We're not going to drag this out, but we need to make sure that enough information is given out so you understand the subject. Okay, so we're talking about whose land is it? If you remember, and this is review from last week, you remember we talked about the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, and what kind of covenant is the Abrahamic covenant? It's an unconditional covenant, okay, which means that God does his part, and or in this case, Abraham, will trust or believe what God's going to do to fulfill his promises. Okay, it wasn't put on Abraham. The whole thrust of the unconventional covenant is on the one that makes it. In this case, it's God Almighty made the covenant with Abraham. So that's important to keep that in mind. One of the promises within the Abrahamic covenant, and I didn't look at this last week, but I wanted to make reference to it this week, is found in Genesis 12:3. Genesis 12:3, this is God speaking to Abraham, and he says, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will what? Curse. Curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Okay, that is still active, alive, and working today. All you need to do is look down the footpath of history and see the countries that turned on Israel, and you'll see that those countries either don't exist anymore or they're in dire straits. This verse was a verse that was I was going over and over and over in my head the last several years, because we were starting to kind of hedge on our support for Israel. Okay, now I don't want to wax political or anything like that, but just understand that there is not going to be one nation that curses Israel and will still be blessed. It's if there is, then we have a problem, because God says right here that I'll bless those who bless you, I'll curse those who curse you. So keep that in mind as we go through this, not just tonight, but through the remainder of this study on anti-Semitism. Last week we looked at three different. Well, we actually only got to two of them. Israel's right for to the land. We looked at the biblical, the historical, and the legal. Tonight we're going to look at the legal side of Israel's right to the land. Very quickly, we covered this in depth. Again, if you weren't here last week, I recommend going back and reviewing this online. Point one: God promised the land to Israel, the land of Israel, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants. Point two: God defined the geographical boundaries of the land of Israel. That was a big one last week. I had several people come up to me afterwards and said, I had no idea that Israel was entitled to that much land. But if you remember the maps that we put up there, it's basically from the Nile River to the Euphrates River. Okay, all you need to do is look in your Bibles at the maps in the back of your Bible. It's a big chunk of land, a very big chunk of land. God gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people as a eternal inheritance. Eternal being the key word. Point four: God made guaranteed habitation and total enjoyment of the land conditioned on Israel's faithfulness. Now, in our Old Testament, as we read through it, we see God basically putting Israel in timeout. Okay, it happens with the Assyrian captivity, with the northern tribes. It happens with the Babylonian captivity, the southern tribes. It's something that the Lord said, hey, the land's there, it's yours, but unless you remain faithful to me, you're going to be disciplined. You're going to be disciplined. So you need to keep that in mind, that I believe right now today, Israel is still in a timeout. Okay, I believe that. And hopefully that'll come out as we get a little bit further into this study. Okay. Finally, God's promise to the Jewish people are irrevocable, regardless of belief. Irrevocable. That means they're not going to change. God's not going to take them back. They're made to Israel, and Israel in the scriptures means Israel. So that's the biblical side. And again, this is review. We then looked at the historical reasons for Israel to have the rights to the land. I'm just giving you my summary PowerPoint slide. It's this one here. This is the last one in this section. From Christian rule to Muslim rule, through 2 world wars, there has always been a Jewish presence in the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We need to keep that in mind. From a historical perspective, there has always been Jews in the land of Israel, or what's known today as Palestine. So that's my 5-minute summary from last week's class. You're probably thinking, boy, why did it take you an hour to go through it? Yeah. We're going to talk about the legal portion of this. And just to let you know right up front, we're looking at it from 30,000 feet. Okay, that's how I'm approaching this. We're going to overview some of the history behind the legal rights that Israel has to the land, and I can't go too far in depth. Okay, so keep that in mind, because there's going to be some overlapping between what we're studying down in the lower right-hand corner, the land, and anti-Semitism proper, which is what we'll look at. I don't know if we'll get to it next week or not, but if we don't get to it next week, when I start back in January, there's some crossover here with some of this what I'm teaching. So just keep that in mind. I may not say everything that needs to be said tonight, but I'll say, what has to be said when we get to it. And of course, here's that word. Okay, we're going to be looking at some history. We're going to be looking at some history. Now, history may not be your cup of tea, and I understand that. Okay, I've grown, in high school, way long ago, when we were still, riding horses to high school and all. History was not one of the things I look forward to. But it's amazing how God has a way of saying, okay, you don't like history? Well, guess what? You're going to study history for the rest of your life, which is what I've been doing, because we need to understand from history what we're dealing with here, whether it's this subject tonight or any subject that we teach in the scriptures. There's a lot of you folks in here that teach, and I appreciate every time that you go back into history and teach the history behind whatever subject it is that you're teaching. But some people don't like history. Some people, they just have a real problem with history, and just saying the word can really send you into a tailspin. And I'm not going to apologize for it. And I want you to know that I will not be handing out milk and cookies tonight. Okay? So, if you it's hard to believe I even wanted to say that, but it's true. Anyways, okay, now that I got your attention, let's talk about the legal portion of the land and why we believe Israel has that right. Okay, 3 points to make real quick. The Jewish people settled and developed the land in ancient days and have maintained a continuous existence in the land for nearly 3,700 years. The Jews returned to join Jews. Jews came to Israel and developed communities. And what they did in those communities is they took undeveloped areas of the land and they developed them. And that took place during the 19th and the 20th centuries until Israel became a state. The second point, the Balfour Declaration. Anyone ever heard of the Balfour Declaration? Okay, we have a couple folks that know about it. Okay, it's important. You'll find out how important it is here in a few moments. But basically, Britain was saying through this declaration that they believe that the Jews should have a homeland, and the international community kind of got behind them. I was surprised at that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. The state of Israel, point number 3, has the right to claim historic land that was captured as a result of fighting defensive wars in 1948 and 1967. Okay? 1967 is the Six-Day War. Some of you know about that. Those that don't probably weren't alive then. But it's important for us to understand that the land that we're going to be talking about, and you'll hear this over and over, and I'm going to try and bring it out and try and give you as much background as I can without boring you. But Israel seems to have always been the one that's been under attack. And when they come under attack, not only in 48 and in 67, but also 73 and several other times throughout the last 40, 50 years, any land that they have won, for the most part, Israel has given a lot of that land back. Now, I read a few interesting things about the leadership in Israel, and a lot of them are secularist. In other words, they thought, well, we'll give the land back because we know if we give the land back, those people won't attack us anymore because we're doing them such a nice favor. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, that's just not the way people think, especially in that part of the world. So keep these 3 things in mind. Just a couple of bullet points to get us started. One of the things that we're going to have to do. Anyone remember the time tunnel? Now you're going to date yourself, okay? Those of us that were alive and enjoyed it for almost one season, I think it ran. Basically, they went into that tunnel and they came out on the other end somewhere else in another era of time somewhere. So that's kind of what we're going to do. We're going to go into the Fiore time tunnel because I'm jumping almost 2,000 years ahead from where we were at last week. We talked a lot about Abraham last week, talked a lot about what the Bible says in the Pentateuch, about Israel's ownership of the land and what they were promised and all that. But I need to jump us forward. And that's why I'm taking, the 30,000-foot look at this subject on the land. Okay. So let's look at a few of the legal facts concerning the land. Okay. These are facts concerning the land. I don't know if you're aware of this, but until the 1960s, the term Palestine basically referred to the land of Israel. It was Yasser Arafat. Some of you know that name, some of you don't. You can Google it later if you want. Changed the historic meaning of the word Palestine when the PLO, or the Palestine Liberation Organization, was created. Basically, what Yasser Arafat did, very clever of him, is the land was filled with Arab Muslims from Syria, from Lebanon, from Egypt, from Jordan. Those were the Arabs that were living in the land of Israel in the 60s. Arafat decided that they're all Palestinians, and that's what we're going to call them from now on. Now, I'm giving you like the real short version of this. And since that time, the Palestinians are a group that live in this portion of the land of the world that are the ones that are being oppressed, the ones that have been subjected to Israel's whatever you want to put in with them, okay? So you need to keep that in mind. Palestine wasn't a bad word. Palestine was just a reference to that portion of the world. But that changed in the mid-60s. And we'll spend a little bit of time probably when we get further into anti-Semitism about what Arafat did with this group of people, how they subjugated them and made them now the ones that are being tormented by the ones that rule the land, which would be Israel. Okay, Israel bought and settled the land. This is a quote from. I love this. I love this title. Okay, this comes from the Complete Idiot's Guide to the Middle East Conflict. Okay, it says this: more than 90% of the land Jews had purchased by 1936 had been bought from landowners, nearly 40% of whom lived in Egypt and Syria. Now, think of the numbers that are up there that are highlighted. Less than 8.7% of the Jews' land was purchased from Arab farmers. Now keep that in mind, okay? Israel bought the land. They bought the land from basically from wealthy Arab landowners. And from what I understand, um, most of them lived outside of this area. They lived somewhere else, but they were mega landowners, and Israel paid big dollars for the land that they have. So that's something that you probably never hear about, when this is reported on CNN or MSNBC or whatever. Okay. The third thing, this is some numbers from the Scientific American, 1960. These are 1960 numbers. Okay. This is what Israel did to transform the land. They drained 44,000 acres of marshland, and I might add, malaria-infested marshland. They drained 44,000 acres of marshland. They extended irrigation to 325,000 acres. In other words, before that, it was nothing but desert. They irrigated it, and now they're growing on it. Okay. They established range cover, which is like grass and those sort of things that animals eat, and they also planted 37 million trees. Okay. Now those numbers are out of date because this is an old report, but keep that in mind. I mean, if we look at the numbers, and I should have brought the numbers up to today, but I got my information from this magazine, so I stayed with this. So just a couple facts concerning the land and what Israel did to the land, how they acquired the land. Okay. The truth of the matter. This is from a book called The Case for Israel. The myth of a stable and settled Palestinian Arab Muslim population that had lived in villages and worked the land for centuries, only to be displaced by the Zionist invaders, is simply inconsistent with the recorded demographic data gathered now this is important, it's gathered not by the Jews, not by the Zionists, but it's gathered by the local, should have put, Arab authorities. They're the ones that back this statement. Okay, that's the truth of the matter. Okay, I know you're hearing a lot of different things out there in the news, and especially over the last several years, but this is the way it is. Okay, this is truth. And when truth is attacked, it's usually attacked with a lie. And the one thing that I've discovered over the years is the more frequently you repeat a lie, the more often it grows and grows and grows to before you know it, everybody thinks it's the truth. Okay. We can talk about the weather or any subject. You repeat a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. And that's where we're at with the land, according to the media today. Back in the mid 1800s, Mark Twain, everyone knows Mark Twain, okay? Mark Twain took a trip over to this area, and he wrote a book called The Innocents Abroad. The Innocents Abroad. And this is a quote from that book that he was there, I think, in like the late 1860s. The book was actually published a little bit later, but look what he says about the land of Palestine. It's a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds a silent, mournful expanse. A desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We never saw a human being on the whole route. And I think he's talking about his trip from Jerusalem up to Galilee. That's what I believe he's making reference to here. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive and the cactus, whose fast friends of the worthless soil had almost deserted the country. That's that's a first-hand account of what the land of Israel looked like at this time in the 1860s. That's how bad it was. There was nothing there. There was nothing there. This is a picture from approximately that time frame, and it just goes on and on from there. There was nothing. There was nothing there. He's really disappointed out there. You know, it gets better. It'll get better. You know, yeah, cookies and milk come. Okay, everybody with me? Any questions, comments? I know this is a lot of information and this is a lot of background and history, but you know, I'm trying to kind of at least build on what we looked at last week, and we have to. We have to. Okay. This is a quote from Dr. Randall Price. Another quote. Yes, another quote. By 1860, a small number of European Jews began to settle in Palestine, which at the time was part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Anyone ever heard of the Turkish Ottoman Empire? Keep that in mind. It's going to play a big part coming up. Palestine was then sparsely populated by a relatively small number of Arabs in different towns and villages. Jerusalem was populated by an Arab majority and less than 3,000 Jews. This is in Jerusalem proper. As the Jews began to settle in Palestine, the Arabs were concerned with a change of status. Jewish immigration began to change the landscape because Jewish immigrants started transforming deserts and swamps into farms, which in turn attracted more Jewish immigration. So try and keep in mind where we're at. It's the 1860s. Okay, anti-Semitism is growing in Europe. There are things that are happening in Europe that I'm not going to talk about tonight, but the Jews are under attack in Europe. Many of them have already settled in the land of Palestine, and as they begin to transform the countryside, other Jews start to join them and help them in their quest to build a better life for themselves there in Israel, which of course wasn't known as Israel at that time. It's known as Palestine at this time. Okay. Onto the scene comes a Jewish fellow by the name of Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl, and he sees what's happening in Europe. He sees what's happening in Europe, and he knows that the only thing that can save the Jewish population is for them to have a land of their own, a place where they can live. And so he starts this first Zionist movement in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. And the quote I have down there for you, I thought was very interesting. To me, it's almost a prophetic quote. Okay, follow along with me. At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. Maybe in 5 years, certainly in 50, everyone will realize it. So, little math problem down there at the bottom. 1897 plus 50 is 1947. You're going to find out what happens in 1947 because the United Nations will be alive and active at this time and actually doing some good for a change. That'll change quick enough, but just keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind, okay? This is the Ottoman Empire as it stood just before World War I. You can see that they had, most of North Africa, they had all of the Middle East Turkey, of course, that was their headquarters. They're called the Ottoman Turks. They're called the Ottoman Turks. Then, of course, they go up into Greece and elsewhere. But this is important because the Ottomans ruled this portion of the world at this time. Okay, they're the ones that ruled this portion of the world. Why is this important? Why is it important for us to know something about the Ottoman Empire? I'm glad you asked. Because the Ottoman Empire will side with Germany in World War I. What happened to Germany in World War I? They got their butts kicked. That's the vernacular from the Hebrew, okay? Um, so, we need to understand, that the Ottomans basically lost big time. How bad did they lose? Well, France and Britain will now take over the Middle East. This is the way the land was divided after World War I. You can see the north portion of the Middle East goes to French control. The southern portion, which would include Palestine, the yellow part there, goes to the British. So that's important to keep in mind because the British are the ones that are going to champion Israel's right to exist. And they're going to do it starting with a fellow by the name of Arthur Balfour. Arthur Balfour. He was, at the time that this Balfour Declaration is written, he is a foreign secretary. He also served as prime minister for a few years and some other things, but he's kind of an important individual. He writes a letter to Lord Rothschild. Okay, yeah, that Rothschild. Okay, that's the one we're talking about. He writes this letter to Lord Rothschild. He says this: His Majesty's government, now this is the British, okay, His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jews. In other words, those that are living in the land now, communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in another country. Okay. Now, I know this isn't the most exciting lesson that you've ever heard, but you need to understand that we're building. Okay. We're going from Jewish settlements coming in during the 1800s and starting to settle the land, buying land at exorbitant prices, and that continues until the First World War. Okay, after the First World War, well, this takes place during the war, okay, the Balfour Declaration, but this will become the kind of the linchpin that everything else concerning the land hangs on. As a matter of fact, Balfour, at the end of his letter, says this to Rothschild. He says, I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. That's the one that Herzl started back in 1897. Okay, so you can see we're moving. We're moving forward with this land. Okay, and this land is going to continue to be an issue. Okay, this is what the land looked like before the British Mandate. This is around 1917. The little blue areas, those are Jewish settlements. Everything else, is it green that we're talking about? Is it green? You folks have to say, yes, it's green, Paul. That's all Arab land. Okay, that's all Arab land. Okay, they had Palestinian. It's not Palestinian. It's Arab, because back then there was just Arabs living in the land. Okay, there was no Palestinians. Okay, there were no Palestinians. So After 1400 years of Islamic rule, okay, the Ottoman Turks come to an end in the Middle East. Britain and France take over. Britain and France will take over. And based on the promises of the Balfour Declaration, this is the land that will become theirs eventually. This is in the late, around the map on the left here is about 1922. I think it's what my source said. Okay. The green, someone shake their head. Yes, is it orange? Are you folks sure about that? We're talking about this here? Okay. Good grief. Is something wrong with my, display here? It's okay. They they orange for those of you that want it to be orange. Okay, those are Jewish settlements, of course. All the white area, Arab settlements. Okay, the right side we'll talk about in a moment. There, that's how the land will be partitioned by the United Nations in not too many years down the road. Okay, you say, Paul, what are you getting at here? Well, here's what I'm getting at here. You see this? This was the original British mandate. You see this big block here? All this here? That was promised to Israel by the British. But the British were saying this to Israel, and at the same time, they were saying this to the Arabs. Okay? What were they saying to the Arabs? They were saying, well, on second thoughts, we're going to give you folks all this land over here. Okay, that goes to the Arabs. This little sliver over here will go to Israel. But they weren't finished. They weren't finished. They actually reduced the size that they were going to give Israel by 77%. Okay? Now, this is historic fact, folks. I mean, I didn't find these on somebody that's working out of their basement, putting stuff out there that's pro-Israel. Okay, this is common knowledge, but of course, it's never reported on like this. Okay, this is in the 20s. This is how it was going to be divided. Again, before the ink was even dried on the Balfour Declaration, Britain was already talking out of both sides of their mouth, saying one thing to the Jews and another thing to the Arabs. And this is basically where it wound up. Okay. This is land ownership. Again, I'm a map person, so you have to forgive me if I go crazy with maps, but they say a lot to me whenever I teach. So the dark, I wouldn't even call it a color. Okay. The dark area is going to be the Jewish homeland. At least that's what they were hoping for. The light area would be Arab-owned land. Arab-owned land. Okay, this is around the 1947 time frame, because in 1947, and here's the biggie. Okay, in 1947, the United Nations Resolution 181 says that we're going to divide this portion into two sections. The Arabs will receive 82% of the land. The Jews will receive about 18%. Of course, the Arabs weren't real happy about that because they wanted 0% of Jews having anything in the Middle East. Okay, you need to kind of keep that in mind. Just a few months after this resolution is made, Israel becomes a state. Israel becomes a nation. May 14th, 1948 is a date that you really need to remember if you want to know your history on Israel. Okay, it's the start. It's the beginning. It's like July 4th, 1776 to us. That's the birth of the state of Israel. Follow along with me. In Tel Aviv, standing under the portrait of Theodore Herzl, right here, is Ben-Gurion. Okay, Ben-Gurion solemnly reads from the Declaration of Independence for Israel, and he says this: by virtue of our natural and historic right and the strength of the United Nations resolution. Okay, This is something that never comes out when you're hearing this reported on the news. The United Nations gave Israel this land. They partitioned it this way. Israel didn't conquer this. Israel was given this by the United Nations in 1947. We hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Erst, that means the land of Israel, to be known as the State of Israel. Look at the box here. Within hours, the United States and, surprised me, the Soviet Union recognized Israel as a country. Okay. Look at this last sentence. Israel offers full rights and peace to Arab residents within the land. They didn't try and throw them out. They didn't try to, round them up or whatever. They offered them full citizenship in the nation of Israel. Make sense? Okay, that's kind of where we're at. But this, we know the reasons behind a lot of this, but none of this ever comes out. Okay, it was the United Nations that gave this land to Israel. They're the ones that said, this is the way we're partitioning it. And that's the way it stayed. Okay. So the miracle on the Mediterranean is complete. Okay, it's complete. And in Jeremiah chapter 16, verses 14 and 15, I know we haven't been in our Bibles tonight, and I don't necessarily apologize for that, but I'm trying to lay down some groundwork before we actually get into into the scriptures. Okay, look what Jeremiah says. He says, "Therefore, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no longer be said, as the Lord lives, who brought up the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt." That's what the Lord did, right? But as the Lord lives, who brought up the sons of Israel from the land of the north and from all the countries where he had banished them, for I will restore them to their own land, which I gave to their fathers. Now, I don't want to be guilty of cherry picking scripture, okay? But this is a prophecy that, if anything, has double emphasis. This prophecy, I believe, applies to what we saw in Israel in 1948. Okay, Israel was returned to their land. They were given their land back, at least a portion of it, and they were happy with that, even though it had been reduced to just slivers here and there. But keep this in mind. Although Israel has been regathered, it is regathered in unbelief. It's regathered in unbelief, which lines up with, I believe, end time prophecy. It's beyond the scope of our class tonight, but if you want what I taught on this issue, go back to my teaching on the Olivet Discourse from last spring, and we covered all this about Israel being in the land in unbelief. There's a reason they're in the land in unbelief, because they are going to have to be the ones that call on the Messiah, Jesus Christ, to come back and rescue them during the tribulation period or close to the end of the tribulation period. That's what's going to take place. So this prophecy about Israel being regathered, and this is just one prophecy from Jeremiah. Okay, there are others. They're being regathered, and they have been regathered, and they'll continue to be regathered, but they're being regathered in unbelief. In other words, they are not the nation of Israel right now. And correct me if I'm wrong, those of you that may have more insight. From what I understand, the vast majority of Jews are Jews in name only. They don't necessarily follow Torah. They don't necessarily follow anything. It's almost like, and I can use myself, as an ex-Catholic, okay, I was Catholic in name only. What religion are you? I'm Catholic. When's the last time you were at Mass? Well, I don't know, but I'm a Catholic. That's basically how the Jews are right now over in Israel. They're Jews in name only. They're Jews in name only. They have the heritage, they have everything going for them, but they're there in unbelief. It's a small minority that are, true Jews as far as following the Torah and so on and so on. Okay. Plus, it opens up opportunities for us to witness to them. Okay? They need Jesus before Jesus comes back. Okay. Yes.
So when you say they're in unbelief, you mean unbelief from the Jewish tradition, or an unbelief meaning they don't have the Son, so they don't have love?
It's a good question. What I'm stating in this is that they're unbelief in Jewish customs, in for lack of a better term, Jewish religion.
Yeah.
Okay. But there are Messianic Jews we know. Olivier Melnick, who I'm quoting several times. Okay, I've heard the completed Jew or Messianic Jew, whatever title you want to give them. But the unbelief I'm talking about here is that their unbelief in their religion of the Jews. They don't follow Torah or anything at this time. Okay, that will change down the road, but not anytime soon. Okay. Any other questions, comments? See how much further I can get here tonight. Okay. This is for us as Christians concerning the land promises. Accept the authority. This is from Randall Price, by the way. Accept the authority of God's word. What God says, he says, no matter how hard it is to believe. No one believed God would ever restore the Jews to the land. And today there is a modern state of Israel. Be encouraged by God's faithfulness to Israel. Israel's history of God's past faithfulness, okay, we see from the scriptures, proves he is and will continue to be faithful to Israel. God always keeps his promises, and that includes the land promise, which we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks. Okay, Israel is where they're supposed to be right now, and hopefully, besides these 2 classes and the book that some of you will start reading tonight, I'm sure, there's there's things to be excited about. I mean, God's moving right now. I mean, if nothing else, Israel being back in the land as a country after 2,000 years is a miracle in itself. Most Christians don't understand that. Now, there's a segment of Christianity, and we'll talk about this when we get into our further into anti-Semitism. There's a group of Christians that don't believe that Israel is Israel anyways. They believe that the church replaced Israel. Okay, I'm going to show you from Scripture that can't be true. That can't be true. But that's the belief of a lot of certain denominations. So this is important to keep in mind. Just something that hopefully helps us understand that God is a promise keeper. He is the promise keeper with a capital T. Okay. So how about something a little bit different? We've been talking about Israel. Let's talk about Muslims for a change. Okay. Let's talk about the Muslims for a change, and we'll kind of wrap up with some of this that I'm getting into, because I don't want to go too far into this. Okay, there are Muslim claims to the land, and these are some of the questions that I want us to answer because it's important. Because we have basically 2 groups of individuals over there now. We have the Jews and we have the Muslims, and they are at they're at loggerheads right now. From what I understand, from what I've read, from the research I've done, every one of those nations that I put up on the board last week in their declarations concerning the land have one thing in common. They want to push Israel into the Mediterranean Sea. Whatever they're saying, how can I say this and be, well, I can't be politically correct because there's no political correctness about this. Okay. One of the things that Muslims are allowed to do, and this is in their Quran, is they are allowed to lie if it furthers the advancement of Islam. Everybody hear what I just said? They are allowed to lie about anything if it furthers the advancement of Islam. So when they're saying peace, 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 and there is no peace, okay, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Some of this will come out as we go through this. These are some of the things I want us to look at, and we're not going to get through all this tonight. We'll finish it up next week because your brains are probably about to explode. Those of you that are still awake with me, okay? Does the Quran support their claims? Does it? Does biblical history support their claims? Okay, we're going to look at some passages in Scripture, especially going back to Genesis. We're going to talk about Ishmael, and that's basically their argument. Okay, you need to understand. Okay, I'm taking a little rabbit trail. Is that what we call it? What's Bonnie? Is that what she calls it? Remember, she said, you can go on a rabbit trail just to make sure you come back to where you're at. Okay. Islam teaches that Abraham was going to sacrifice Ishmael. That's in the Quran. Okay. Abraham took Ishmael, not Isaac, and he was the one that was going to be sacrificed. And Allah said, well, let's put the stops on that. That's not going to happen. So they've reinterpreted that whole story. Okay, Isaac is out of the picture altogether. Okay, Ishmael becomes center stage because they say from Ishmael comes the Muslim race or religion or whatever. Okay, we'll show you a little bit about that next week. Okay. So now I'm back on my trail here again. Okay. Are there any legal claims according to the Muslims? Well, there may be, but they don't hold water. Okay. Just a few facts concerning the Quran. Few facts concerning the Quran. Okay. This is their supposed inspired Bible. Okay, that's the best way I can put it. And I shouldn't even use that in the same sentence, should I? Okay. In the Quran, there is not one mention of Jerusalem. There is not one mention of Jerusalem in the Quran. Okay. But yet, all of a sudden, Jerusalem seems to be the center of the world for the Muslims. Okay. There are two cities, Medina and Mecca, that are number one and number two when it comes to the to the Muslims. Number one and number two. One of the things that all Muslims are supposed to do is take a pilgrimage to Mecca once during their life. That's one of the things they're supposed to do. Okay. Jerusalem's not even mentioned, but in our scriptures, in the Old Testament, just a couple times it's mentioned, isn't it? Jerusalem. Okay. So there's nothing in history. There's no evidence that Muhammad ever came to Jerusalem. There is a tale that that is spun that see how I can put this. I'm not sure if this is in one of the hadiths or whatever, which are outside the Quran writings, that Muhammad actually ascended to heaven. Now listen to this: ascended to heaven on where the Dome of the Rock is at. That rock that's under that dome. I don't know if there really is a rock under that dome. I mean, it's not just a rock. I mean, it's a huge, stone. That's where Muhammad supposedly ascended to heaven on a white steed The name of that steed was Barak. Okay? The name of that steed was Barak.
Are you making that up?
I am not making that up. Okay? That is their.
Fact checking you right now, Paul.
You go right ahead. Yeah. I'm not even in a debate, though, so, yeah.
And that makes Jerusalem their third holiest site.
Exactly. But up until recent history, now hear this. I'm kind of wrapping this up. Okay, I don't want to. I have a quote from the Quran next, and I'm actually gonna wait till next week to get to it. But what was I saying?
You're right about that.
Well, boy, that's a relief, Man, I got through that one. Yeah. So I have no idea what I was going to say, but boy, it was really good. That's all I can tell you. Now you're going to have to come back next week because I may remember it by next week.
Sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
You just read some from, and maybe hold that till next week.
Well, thank you. That's good. Let's do that. Okay, we'll take Wayne's lead on this. Yeah, we'll do that next week. The quote I have from the Quran is actually, they say the Quran basically gives them, the Holy Land. The quote I have, see now, this is the hook. This is can we use that in television? Got the hook. We're using the hook. The tease. Okay, the tease. You got to come back next week to see the quote from the Quran that basically. Oh, I can't even tell you because it'll give it away. No, basically the quote from the Quran, and you'll see it. Like I said, I don't want to put it up because I wanted to say some other things, but basically it assigns. Hang in there, John. Okay. Basically, it says that Allah gives the land to the Jews. Okay. Now, how do they get around that one? Well, come back next week and I'll tell you how they get around that one. Okay. Look, I know this has been kind of maybe laborious, especially for those of you that hate history. I know there was a lot of quotes, and I don't even have a handout for you of the quotes. But we're moving to a point where we're going to kind of transition over into anti-Semitism. And the anti-Semitism will actually start in the first century, and it will grow from there to what we see happening today. Okay, that's kind of where I'm going with this. So the last 2 weeks, we just had to lay this groundwork for the land because that's kind of the starting point for this whole discussion on anti-Semitism. Okay, the Jews are in the land illegally. The Muslims want nothing more than to push them out of the land totally. They don't want a two-state solution. I'm sorry to disappoint our president and those on all the news media. They do not want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution, and that one-state solution will be a Muslim country where Israel is at right now. It's that simple. There's no way around that from what they say behind the scenes. All their documents point to that. The annihilation of Israel. All of them. They all state that. Okay, I'm getting all worked up. My blood pressure's up, but we're going to go ahead with, the perfect timing. How about that? 8 o'clock on the nose here, okay? Let me go ahead and I'm out of breath. Wayne, would you close us in prayer, and then we'll get going?